right, well, anyway, so we're here for a legislative update. We're asking our elected officials, our state representatives. First of all, we have Senator Jeff Pittman representing the Senate District 5. To his left is Tim Johnson, Representative Tim Johnson, who represents District 38. Dave Bueller tells me he can respond to either one for District 40, right? And Pat Proctor from representing District 41. So we've asked them to come and tell us what happened during the legislative session, give us an outline of what they did to us as citizens. And we want to focus on the legislation. So that is our focus. If you have any issues about one of these gentlemen not returning a phone call or any other non-legislative issues, please get with them off after the meeting, but during this meeting, please focus on legislation. To do that, our format today is they're going to give each gentleman 4 minutes to make their opening statement. After their 4 minutes, all four of them, so after the first 16 minutes, then I'll ask the first 2 questions from the chamber. Each person will have 2 minutes to answer that question. And then we're going to open it up to audience participation. Now, we have some cards over here. We ask that you write out your cards and submit them. My committees are over here. There we go. My committee, Mr. Kelly and Jeanette and Mike Powell will review those and pass them to me so we can ask those questions. So with that, Jen, have I missed anything?
Nothing.
My committee,
Sorry.
we're ready to go? All right. Let's start. Tim, let's start with the left.
Good morning and thank you so much. Tim Johnson. I live down off of K7 Highway, just about Leavenworth Road. It was moved last year. My wife and I downsized and I just really enjoyed that. I will point out over here on that little table is a map of the new 38. A lot of changes came about last year in legislature a year ago. I'm still learning the Leavenworth part of my district. I will tell you, I'm very thankful that I'm no longer serving in Johnson County. This is where I belong. So I ran for office 3 years ago. I can't believe how quickly it has gone. There are many issues that I promised to work on. One of those was veterans issues. I'm very thankful for the progress we've had, and every one of our legislators in this county, without exception, has worked hard for our veterans. I've also been on the K-12 Education Budget Committee, which is the most challenging thing I've ever had to deal with in my life as we discuss issues of funding. It's a huge part of our budget. Special education. I'm a strong proponent for funding special education and early education. I have a youth ministry on the side, and to me, what we're doing with these young children is critical. I'm also on the Welfare Committee and foster care and adoption oversight. Another critical issue. We're going to be hearing quite a bit about that in the media, I would guess, in the next 2 to 4 weeks as the Kansas City Star prepares to run a series of articles regarding some issues with how we're handling it. But I think we are getting better. Now, I heard a couple weeks ago that I was not running for a 3rd term. That's not correct. I'm not quite sure how it works. I will tell you, I've been to all my doctors except the one I don't really want to go to, one with the small hands, but all the other stuff is good. I've started to lose some weight. Still have a couple problems like an old car. I have a couple leaky seals and things of that. But I'm coming down. I'm going to be walking up here in Leavenworth this summer, because I just filed last Friday. My mailer should be out. If you haven't seen it because you're not in my district, please take a copy. At least it'll introduce you a little bit to what this session was about. We have a timer?
Oh, we need a timer.
Oh, okay. And I enjoy what I do. Semi-retired from teaching. In the fall, I still serve as a substitute teacher in elementary schools. I find that keeps my game going, especially as I serve on education and children's issues. I enjoy doing that, but I also find that I have spent a lot of time meeting with people, and that's pleasurable. So if you want to come down and meet me at Turkey's Cafe for coffee anytime, I'll buy the coffee. We'll enjoy, we'll talk. And I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
This one's not working? Okay. You know, let's go ahead and start. Can you hear me in the back?
Yes.
All right. I'll talk loud here. Thank you for being here. I'm Senator Pittman from Leavenworth. I represent Senate District 5, which is Leavenworth-Lansing, now Baser, and Western Wyandotte County, and it's such a pleasure to be here. I want to thank all those who voted for me and those who didn't, who are engaged in the process. It's important that we're here right now, but even those out there that are engaged with different issues at the state and the city level. I love that because this is a democracy. That's a government for the people, by the people. And sometimes in the state legislature, especially in the last few years, I do feel that is under threat. There's a distinct feeling of bans, personal bans, bans on trans, bans on books, bans on ballot boxes, bans on, I don't know, women's control of their health care. And there's bans at the local government level about whether the local governments can use things that the local government wants to use, like prevailing wage. There's even a ban on bans by the local government where they can't ban plastic items or other things because the state has said we're going to ban those kinds of bans. And so you feel a little bit like there's an overarching kind of, I call it authoritarianism, feel of control from the state right now. But despite this, I feel personally like the balance, we fight against some of these things, the discussion is there. I feel this year was a good year in terms of other things. We did great things, even under this threat to our democracy. We're in the most fiscally stable position we've been in decades. When I first came in, there were some very rash, kind of not well thought out, I'd say, tax plans that were doubled down upon. And we were in a position where we couldn't fund our schools, our retirement plans, our roads. We were borrowing, and our credit rating had tanked. And with some coalitions that we put together when I was a representative, we were able to reestablish a more stable, fiscally sound, looking out 5 years, and we established stability. And we've continued that. We have extra money, you've heard about it, but we don't know how much money is due to some of those exorbitant PPP handouts and some of the other stimulus that went out to the population. We're in a state of uncertainty when it comes to budgeting, and we've been able this year to have a steady hand, a steadier than that hand, out there on the budget. And that's a good thing for our state. It's a good thing for investment. We are at a record level of investment in our state. From outside investments, nearly $12 billion in the last 5 years have come into our state in terms of investment. We're growing jobs, we're growing business. And we're able to fully fund education this year. Now, we can talk more about that. I want to emphasize my personal achievements in the sense that I had 3 bills that me and a couple other senators pushed through. And you'll hear things about Democrats, Republicans, who can do what. Those are power plays. It's about relationships to me. It's about, one of the bills was a personal bill that gives in-state tuition for our military that come back to Kansas and their kids that come back to Kansas. That's a huge bill so that we have in-state tuition where we have those people that are coming back into the workforce that have been here before. There's another personal bill, 131, that allows team doctors. Team doctors couldn't operate or even practice medicine on their team members when they were here. We're one of 4 states that didn't allow that. I worked with another 2 senators, helped push that through. There's a lot of bills I helped push through. I'm here working for you. I hope to engage with some of the questions today. and I love having you here, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator.
Hey, good morning. So first off, thanks to the Chamber of Commerce and I think Jen Andrews is here and Ted Davis for moderating. Can you hear me in the back of the microphone? Pretty good? Okay, got a thumbs up back there. Okay, I'm happy to be here today to participate in this event as the representative from the 40th District. My wife Lisa and I, who's here in the crowd, we came into this community in 1984, been there pretty much ever since, and we raised our families here. We're at a unique place in our life. We both retired, and this was an opportunity for me to continue serving. Retired from the Navy about a year ago, and it was really, when I look at my background in this community, working at Hallmark Cards, and then 28 years in the Navy on top of that, that skill set, I believe, is going to serve me well, and it has in the legislature. So during my campaign after the election, I wanted to work on 3 specific committees, and this is one of those things, be careful of what you ask for, because I got all 3. First one is the Fed and State Committee, second one is Health and Human Services, and the third one is the House Taxation Committee. And then just this week, the Speaker of the House announced the interim committee appointments, and I will serve on the interim committee on the Intellectual and Developmental Disability Waiver. And as I understand the purpose of that committee, it's to end the wait for those with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And again, that's just an assignment that came out this week. So during the campaign last year, constituents I spoke with were overwhelmingly dissatisfied with, I'm going to call it the economic climate, record high inflation, was created by the Biden administration. During this session, I kept these concerns in mind, committed to work on legislation that would reduce taxes and improve the economic condition in this state. Now, as Senator Pittman talked about, we're going to get into some of the legislative details later, but what I want to do is maybe do a little bit of a recap of the legislative process. In the House, there are 26 committees that produce bills. 26, and I was on 3 of them. Some of these bills would go through the committee process and get a hearing on the floor. And those 26 committees, they produced roughly 800 bills in that January to the end of February timeframe. And then roughly 75 of those became law. This means those bills survived the committee process that were approved in the House and the Senate. Some of them had to go through conference committee, and then subsequently on to the governor for action. In some cases, the governor would either pass them, she would veto them, or she could actually allow, I think, one law to go into effect without a signature this year. That's the process. Each legislator has to develop his or her own process to educate himself on those bills. You cannot be an expert on everything that goes through those 26 committees. And so for me, what it became was this. You have to prioritize your committee assignments first. That's the first thing. And then with that committee, there's an agenda that the committee chairman has. You have to effectively prepare for those committee hearing meetings, and you have to listen to the constituent testimony to do your job effectively. And at the end of the day, no matter what you want, you have to vote yea or nay. Both parties educate themselves. The Democrats call it agenda in the House. We call it calendar. I would tell you this. We passed a lot of legislation, and there are some that are contentious, but by far, most of them are bipartisan. We passed an education bill, a fully funded education. We came within one vote of passing $500 million of sustainable tax relief to the state, vetoed by Governor Kelly. I would say this as I close. Do you want to know what we're doing? 30 seconds. Go to kslegislator.org. On that website, you can find all 125 representatives. You can find all 40 senators. You can look up our voting record. You can look up the committees that we're on, the bills that we sponsored. It's a great way to keep abreast of the legislative activity. You can watch live video feeds of committee hearings and the House that are going on. 10 seconds. Thank you very much. We'll get into the rest of the minute. Appreciate it. Thank you. 2 seconds left.
So thank you to the Chamber, Ted, Jen, thank you for putting this event together. I love doing these. I think it's very good that we are able to have a forum where everybody gets a chance to talk directly to us, and I appreciate that. When I was running to serve you for the first time 4 years ago, I told you I was going to be laser focused on bringing jobs and opportunity back to Leavenworth. That's what I've been doing for the last 3 years in the legislature. There's really two big components to that. I'll touch on them briefly, and I hope as we're going through questions and answers, I get to dive into some of this. But it's about creating the jobs here, but it's also about the people that are here and getting more people here to work in those jobs. So for the jobs here already, the first thing that I did was the Historic Kansas Act to get more investment in our historic downtown and historic downtowns like ours across the state. You know, these old buildings, those are the engines for small businesses, especially retail and hospitality. We got to get those back in service and get businesses in them to create those jobs. But I also was active and supportive of measures to get jobs across the region, which is why I voted for the Apex Economic Incentive Package that brought Panasonic right across the river down into DeSoto. Right outside of our county. Hopefully we can get a high-speed north-south corridor so that people can live up there and work down here, and then while they're living up here, they're going to need all those services. It'll generate more jobs. I've been working on getting the bridge done because if we want businesses to come here, we have to have high-speed access to I-70, and we have to have high-speed access to the Kansas City Metro. So that's what makes businesses locate here, is they can get their goods to market out of our town. So I've been working very hard on those transportation issues. But also it's about making this an appealing place for employees to live. When these big companies are looking for where they're going to locate, they are looking at tax structure, they're looking at education and our schools. I love the folks that work at the Leavenworth School District, but we are in the bottom fifth. Our school ranks in the bottom fifth, our school district, in math and in reading. We got to get those numbers up, and that means, first of all, fully funding. I voted for every education spending bill that's come before us. I didn't like everything in them, but I think our education needs to be fully funded. But also, I voted for things to try to get some of the nonsense out of our schools to get back to the fundamentals of reading, writing, and arithmetic, getting our kids job ready and college ready for the 21st century. It's also about bringing the people here and getting the people who are already here back to work. We have across the state, we have a huge workforce participation problem, the worst it's been in 40 years. A lot of people did not come back from COVID and go back to work. We got to get those folks off the sidelines and back into jobs. And so I've been looking at the initiatives that have been coming before the legislature to get those folks back to work. But I also want more people to come here. We got Fort Leavenworth every year. Hundreds of service members separate from the military here in Leavenworth and then go to Texas or Florida because they've got better tax structures. That's why I've been fighting for disabled veteran property tax relief. I sponsored a bill, got it through the House 123-1. We just got great news on Monday that it's going to be heard in the Senate next year. Thank you to all the veterans here in the room who showed up for that, to demand that. And so getting those people to stay here instead of going to those other states. Kansas is stagnant in population right now, and if we don't do something to reverse that before the next census, we're going to lose a congressperson, lose a voice in Washington, D.C. I want more folks living here in Kansas, building their lives and building their future. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, our first question. I'll let you go in whatever order you prefer. First of all, each of you committed to helping people and business owners of Leavenworth-Lansing with exorbitant property value increase. However, after 4 months, the only taxation bill that passed, SB 8, came on the last day of the session, and Governor Kelly vetoed it. Other efforts died along the way. So why is there no property tax relief for anyone?
This one's actually pretty near and dear to my heart. As I mentioned, I serve on the House Taxation Committee, and I would say this. When I ran for office, I wanted to run for tax relief in general. And while we weren't able to do anything specifically on major property tax, we had a great bill in CCR 169. Let me tell you a little bit about that. That bill originated in the House Tax Committee. It had 6 elements, and it was created in a bipartisan fashion. Henry Helgerson on the Democratic side, Tom Sawyer, we all sat together and said, we have $500 million worth of tax relief we can offer to this state. Not everybody owns personal property or would get a property tax relief, so we want to give something for every Kansan. That bill has 6 elements, and they're this. First one is the single income tax rate at 5.15%. The second thing it did is it raised the income tax exemptions for the lowest wage earning groups in the state. Third thing is it phased out the food sales tax. It would have been on July 1st of this year. And I think we all remember Governor Kelly's pledge to do that. It increased the threshold on Social Security tax subtraction cliff. It increased residential property tax exemption, lowered corporate banking privilege taxes. That bill gave tax relief to every single Kansan. Somebody got some relief from it. The governor vetoed it. Her primary reason that she came out against it was the single tax rate, which she called regressive. But again, we made sure that no Kansan was going to pay more taxes. There was something in there for everything. I would tell you this, again, I mentioned it was bipartisan. It was one of the best opportunities that I've seen as a first-term legislator to see both sides work together. That felt awesome. It felt awesome to do that in a committee hearing where we all said, yeah, it's $500 million. How are we going to get there? The sad thing is the governor did veto the bill. We overrode it in the House successfully. The Senate, it failed by 2 votes. I will tell you this, we'll come at it again next year, and I'm confident it will pass because next year is an election year, and those who may not have voted for it this year might be inclined to do so next year. Thank you.
Thank you.
So as I heard it, we want some property tax relief. And we had a bill out there, 2038, was it? For the veterans. 36. Which is fantastic for the veterans. When I look at property tax relief, we see our valuations here locally. We're one of the 5th biggest counties in terms of growth here. And our property tax and our valuations are going up. Mine went up 10, 20% each year. And that's too much. That's why I sponsored a constitutional amendment that would basically allow us to all vote on putting a 4% cap on raising evaluations each year. We do that for the farmers today. It's already out there. And the Senate tax chairperson took that bill, modified it, created a new one, which is fine. I don't need my name on that. And that passed the Senate with the constitutional majority. We need that to go to the House and be passed over there. That will help us all have property tax relief. As far as Senate Bill 8, that had a lot of things in it. What's going on is they're mashing all these bills together, and there's not enough good stuff to counteract what some people see as the bad stuff. I see that flat tax, there was something for everybody. Very tempting, and I think we can come together and have something that's a real relief package next year. I'm confident. But we can't just give it the biggest amount to the most wealthy. We have to have more than $1 going to our working citizens out there as a tax relief if we're giving millions out to the most wealthy out there. So that's part of that Senate Bill 169. It can be modified. We also need to focus on the retirees and the retirement income as well. But I'm confident if we can get this constitutional amendment, Senate's concurrent resolution 1611 out, we're all going to have relief next year. Thank you.
So I would correct one thing in the question. We actually passed 2 measures, and it's been talked about a little bit up here. We passed Senate Bill 169 and Senate Bill 8, 2 different Conference Committee reports, which had property tax relief paid for by the huge windfalls that the state's taken in. Because as prices increase, tax goes up on the pay that's going up and on the cost of goods. And so we're raking in these huge windfalls. $40 million this month, extra money that the state wasn't expecting. We wanted to give that back to you. Governor Kelly vetoed all of that tax relief. And this isn't a Republican-Democrat thing. This is an honesty and public service thing. When she was running to serve us, she said that she was going to be middle of the road. She said she was going to, of course men shouldn't play in women's sports. And then she vetoed fairness women's sports. We had to override her veto. She said that she wanted food sales tax cut now. We sent her a bill, she vetoed it. Honestly, I am a big supporter of this idea that Senator Pittman talked about a constitutional amendment to freeze our valuations or cap the increase in our valuations. Senator Karen Tyson authored a resolution. They passed it in the Senate. I hope it's going to come to us. But honestly, there's a lot of other good things in Senate Bill 169, like 20,000 of your property value on top of the 40,000 that's already exempted, being exempted for property taxes. That hits everybody. Social Security income tax cut, no Social Security income tax. I think that's a great idea to keep retirees in the state instead of going across the river to Missouri where the tax policy is better. But we have to have an honest broker on the other side of the conversation who's going to sign this legislation that we hammer out our legislation.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, I am a retiree, sort of, kind of. Retired, I live on a keeper's retirement and a Social Security retirement, and the $88 a day I get paid as a legislator, part-time. Yeah. So why? The governor vetoed it. I can't speak for her. But what I do know is the people that I relied on, especially in the Senate, Karen Tyson, Senator Tyson, and others, states that are doing the best are those with zero income tax, or the next best here are those that are flat tax. And this comes from a statement from Ty Masterson, President of the Senate. This bill that got vetoed was about average lower income tax taxpayers. It was a vote for people. I voted for it. Now, I am not a tax specialist, I will tell you that. And so I do rely on people that serve on those committees. One thing the bill would have done would have raised the $60,000 appraised value for residential property exempted from the state's 20 mil. And that affects our K through 12 school budget, which is what I work on. I think that was very important. Now, the Veterans Bill came on 3 years ago. I said I would support for disabled veterans. I have two sons who are both now technically disabled. And I received some criticism from one of the governmental agencies in this county over my decision to support that. I'm going to back it off on that. I have seen what the veterans have done day after day after day. Later today, I will go take care of 3 of my grandchildren whose fathers are still in the military, but can't always be at home. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, gentlemen, our second question. Kansas is one of 10 states that have not expanded Medicaid to health care in Kansas. The polling shows that somewhere around 72% of Kansans favor Medicaid expansion. 40 states receive billions of federal dollars for health care, but this legislative session, there was no discussion and no debate. Why?
I'm in the minority up here on this, but I do support Medicaid expansion, care expansion. It's $6 billion we have not taken advantage of in the state of Kansas that could be helping support our healthcare system. I see it as a workforce development issue in terms of having small businesses like in town where they might not be able to offer benefits, but some of those low-wage workers would still have access to health care and not move on to some of the higher-paying jobs where they can get benefits. It helps, like I said, our hospitals, our mental health, and our schools. I did offer an amendment in the budget. We actually lost money in the budget. The budget had, we get a carrot, if you will, that for the next 2 years, if we would have expanded Medicaid this year, we could have spent $70 million less each year. And I used that $70 million to offset some raises for our correction workers in a potential amendment. Unfortunately, it didn't fly. We didn't have the necessary votes to make it happen. So while you might not hear the discussions, the question asks, why are there no discussions? There's constant discussions. But with the makeup of the resistance to Medicaid expansion, it becomes a moot point. We try, we make the points, and without some kind of brokering of this or that, it's not going to happen next year either. Maybe the year after that, when we have a different makeup, it's a possibility. But we're one of a very few states that haven't done this, and I think it's high time we did. It's good for our states, it's good for our citizens. Thank you.
gentlemen, all right, these are the questions that have been submitted. So
We got 3 other people to go.
We're talking about second time in a row where I've gotten moved on to the next task. Thank you, sir. Yeah, really. Moved on to the next task. Yeah.
So what I'd ask is, what is the problem and what is it we're trying to do? What we're trying to do is we're trying to increase health, access to health care. Up here in our district, welcome to our district, by the way, in North Leavenworth, we really have a healthcare desert. Cushing Hospital closed, so we don't have a hospital here. Really, we've got St. Vincent's Clinic, and then if you're active or retired military, we've got a clinic in Munson, that's it. Every other form of healthcare you have to go out of our district to get. It's got to be, we have to have access to healthcare, and it has to be low-cost healthcare. And so that's what I've been working on, is how do we lower the cost and increase the access to healthcare. Last year, we passed a bill that's been bouncing around the legislature for years and years and years that I've been a big supporter of, to take the requirement for a practice agreement for advanced practice registered nurses to provide health care without having the doctor charge them $5,000 and sign a letter for them and never show up in their clinic. We got that removed. You know, that at our restaurant, you know, we can't afford to provide health care for our employees. So what we do when somebody gets sick is we put them in a car and we drive them down to Judy Beck, who's got an advanced practice registered nurse. For $75, we can get taken care of 99.9% of what needs to be taken care of. And that's a low-cost alternative to give people access to health care. I'm also very concerned about the fact you can't have a baby in Leavenworth anymore since Cushing Hospital closed. You got to go out of town. So I've been working with a woman who has a business in maternity centers. So for low-risk pregnancies, these maternity centers have advanced practice registered nurse midwives who can do that delivery service in conjunction with an agreement with the local hospital in case there's some complication. If there's any complications along the way, they can take them straight to the hospital and go through that method. But we've got to get better access to health care, not just dump money down a hole.
So we've come a long way from Medicare when it was begun under Lyndon Johnson, a New Deal. It was a safety net for the poor. We spent it on medical care, and that was a good thing. But it has grown so dramatically. Right now, about $672 billion, and the cost of expansion has gone over the charts. We know the program covers twice as many people and now costs 76% more per enrollee than was originally projected. That's a huge amount. Another study, and I'm quoting from Forbes magazine, 30% of eligibility reviews show errors in expansion states. 30%. That is $1 in $5. About $99 billion. The other problem is Medicaid only pays 62 cents on the dollar to the medical provider. Like Representative Proctor said, we have other options that are cheaper. But about 70% of medical facilities, doctors, will even accept it because they can't make their money back. They have tremendous expenses. And then I'm going to throw this one out. You can keep your doctor. I couldn't. Loved it, but I couldn't keep him. Too often, this issue of Medicaid expansion is saying, we're paying federal taxes, we should get it back. Well, what if we didn't have to pay those federal taxes, but our tax bill be just a little bit lower?
There are two reasons, in my opinion, that Medicaid expansion was not entertained during the legislature this year. First one is, and some of us have already talked about it, is we already have CanCare, which covers low-income seniors, and we have CHIP, which provides for kids in low-income families and those with disabilities. Medicaid also covers low-income caregivers and pregnant women with incomes up to 166% of the federal poverty level. Medicaid expansion is this. It's about providing free government health care to able-bodied or mobile adults ages 19 to 64. This free government health care will be paid for by all Kansans with your tax dollars. Medicaid was never intended to provide free health care for this population. There's also, the second part of this is that in any state that's done Medicaid expansion, there are two things to be true. The number of enrollees are grossly understated, and the cost to the state also is grossly understated. So, and there's studies, there's one here on Medicaid expansion causing an enrollment budget crisis from the Foundation for Government Accountability. Use Kansas as an example. That the estimate on enrollees is somewhere between 140 to 150,000 people. If you use other states' trajectories, it would be closer to 250 to 290,000 people. The low end estimate is $65 to $70 million that the state would have to pay. Using revised enrollment, it'd be closer to 125 million. And when the federal government changes the matching process from 90-10 to 55 to 45, which is projected, it will cost the state about $300 million a year. Governor Kelly vetoed our $500 million sustainable tax plan because it was too risky, not sustainable, etc. I would tell you that the Medicaid cost to expand is going to be closer to that 125 to 300 million in just a few years. And that to me is an unsustainable path. Thank you.
Okay, our first question from the participants has to do with economic development. Vibrant downtowns are vital to the health of communities. The city of Leavenworth has 28 square blocks with a number of unoccupied and dilapidated buildings. A growing trend nationwide is to establish ordinances which prohibit sitting on commercial property in downtown districts. Would you support legislation like this, or do you have other thoughts?
So, I talked in my opening about how concerned I am about getting all of these unoccupied buildings in our district back into service with businesses in them, growing jobs and growing our economy. We need more carrot and less stick, and what you're proposing here is stick. As I talked about briefly, in my second year in the legislature, I sponsored and got passed the Historic Kansas Act. And what it does is it expands on the current historic tax credit program, which is a bureaucratic nightmare. You basically have to hire a lawyer to fill out the paperwork to get the tax credit, and unless you've got a $2 million project, it just isn't feasible. Well, there aren't a lot of $2 million projects in downtown Leavenworth. There's a lot of money that's down there, but they're not that big of projects. And so a lot of people don't want to mess with the historic tax credit. So what we did was we built a program with an alternative 10% tax credit where you just file your taxes and you get the tax credit. I'm still fighting with KDOR to get it even more streamlined, but we've already had one business, the Wolcott Brewery down the street, that transformed a building that had been occupied for a decade into a thriving business in our community. And I want to see that happen again and again and again. It also creates incentives for putting fire suppression in buildings so that we can get those upstairs lofts occupied with more people in them, frequenting all those businesses downtown. It'll create a positive feedback loop where you've got people wanting to live in our downtown because that's where all the fun is and where all the amenities are. I think that the key to solving this problem of getting those businesses back into service with businesses in them, growing jobs and growing our economy is to create an environment where people want to be in those buildings and want to be invested.
Business. I enjoy coming up here to do business in Leavenworth. It's so unique. I spent quite a few years in the city of Leavenworth, which has taken old buildings, built into Swedish motif, and it paid off. And I see that same type of thing. Now, I have signed on to any bill that Pat has brought before us regarding your downtown area, and I will support that. I put my mouth, or I went to work and I brought in one of those businesses that's just down the street, the Celtic Holsters. talked him into moving over from Olathe. He has now created a very thriving business, mail business, that all over the country and the world. It can work here. Now, my favorite spot is just a minute. I'm going to talk a little Swedish because Claudia is the best Swedish tavern there is in this whole area. That's an example of a novelty or a specialty type of activity that will bring in the people. The other thing we have to tag on to is our military post and its history. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we no longer get to make use of their museums, their beautiful campus the way we should. But we should be able to piggyback. And I really think we need to be appealing to the VFWs, the American Legions, to come here for their conventions and enjoy what we have and piggyback on our military. And I think that might be an area, clearly everybody on this group would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I guess the short note, or the clip notes to answer this would be is I would consider any legislation that would attempt to improve business or the business conditions in our community. To do that, the process that you would go through is legislative research would give you a fiscal note that, hey, this is what it's going to cost, or this is the impact. So I would want to consider any bill, and I would want to fully understand what either the cost to implement would be or what the benefits were. So certainly I would take a look at that, and you would want to make sure that there were no unintended consequences. But when you maybe take this issue a little higher, I think the overall question is about economic development for the state. And the sad reality for the state of Kansas is this: we have a net out-migration of population that goes back 2 decades. So some might chalk that up to the loss of the agrarian environment or the declining farm economy. There's a lot of reasons for that. But we've lost population. So when you think about that, you can't keep taxing those that are left, raising taxes to keep the same level of revenue to fund the state. So you have to think about this differently. We have to create an environment that is business friendly across the board. And it's not just the businesses that we need to be thinking about. It's one that's worker friendly. We have to stop that net migration outward, and we do that by keeping people in the state. And to do that, you have to look at those things for vetoes in our tax, or whether it's the Social Security cliff, whether it's the income tax level that we pay. It's all those things that will keep Kansans in Kansas. And to do that, we can fix a lot of things. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. When we talk about downtown development, I do support our local Chamber of Commerce and what they've done. They've really revitalized after the pandemic, bringing more and more people in, encouraging that membership, putting on forums about how do you develop good business strategies. Main Street as well is being revitalized right now. The mainstream program came back after it was decimated during the Brownback era. Department of Commerce was basically wiped out, and now with the new Department of Commerce going with international outreach and other things, we brought in businesses, which has been really nice. There are business owners here who buy these properties and they don't develop them. I don't know what to say about that. It seems as though we should be doing something about that, especially in a 28 block area. If we want a historic town with a historic name, with some of those great branding things that we've done as a city, we need the business owners who buy those buildings to step up. I mean, that's just a simple thing. And that might require a little bit of either city walls or something like that. The fire suppression thing, that's a real problem as well. I would support a Department of Commerce grant to help these downtown business, those who buy these buildings. One of the biggest things is that they don't know how much it's going to cost to get the fire suppression and make it fire safe. I've heard that over and over again. And we might need to have a one-time type grant program to help towns like Leavenworth that have these older buildings that are really showing that they have a historic downtown and a real opportunity. I'd say we have an opportunity too with the prison. We've got a federal prison shutting down, or actually being moved, so we've got a beautiful building up there that might be turned into a museum that we could pull into this, into the branding of the city. We've got one down in Lansing that's also the old building is shut down. I actually helped stop the demolition of that this year. It was $10 million in the budget to do that. I said, hey, we've got to wait at least a year before we do that. Give somebody an opportunity to make that into a museum to help support our local economy. So I do support local and the efforts that are going on right now. but I know we can do better here as a town.
Thank you, Justin. Next question. Does the revenue neutral law account for inflation? If not, would you support action to take the inflation pressures off of government entities? I assume the author of this meant the city and the county.
So what he's talking about when he talks about revenue neutral is the truth in taxation law that we passed last year. It was an initiative by Senator Karen Tyson that I fully supported, that I'm thrilled passed. What it does is it requires county, city, and school board governments to affirmatively vote to raise our taxes. What was happening for years, you'd look in the Leavenworth Times, it'd say county commissioners, or not to pick on them, city commissioners or school board decides to keep mill levy flat. And you read that and you're, oh great, my property taxes aren't going to go up this year. And then you saw your bill and you're like, holy cow, my property tax went up 10, 15%, which is what has been going up here in Leavenworth for quite a few years. What's happening is the property assessor is increasing our valuations every year 10 to 15%. This year was like over 15%, I think, or close to 15%. And the local governments sit on their hands because they know that they're going to reap that windfall without doing anything. Truth in taxation forces them to affirmatively vote that they're going to raise our taxes, otherwise the mill levy drops by the same percentage the property value went up, so that they take in exactly what they took in the year before. And that law is working. Our school board last year voted to remain revenue neutral. The Lansing City Council last year voted to remain revenue neutral. I'm hoping that this year all these governments are going to vote to remain revenue neutral. Just the county government here has raised our property taxes 100% since 2017. That's not my numbers, that's budget numbers from KPI that is collating budget numbers that are reported to the state. That's unsustainable and it's driving people across the river to Platte City and it needs to stop.
Repeat the question. Yes. Does the revenue neutral law account for inflation? And would you support any law to take the inflationary pressures off of government?
I would support it. The inflationary issues are something we have to get under control. Yes, I would support some of that. I apologize because I got talking to Jeff over here. And he was so right about museums and all that. We have two states that have huge museums. But back to the revenue neutral, I think when we put government in the place, meaning the local entities in place of letting you know what it is, then you can ask about it. Now, Baser just had an election, local election for sales tax. It failed, but the people had a say-so on that. And I know we're going to have another bond issue come up because of the growth within the Baser-Linwood School District and the number projections. You have to, money's got to come from somewhere. But at least people will get a chance to vote. So,
I've worked with the local governments. I think it's critical as a state legislator to work with our local entities. We can't just sit the state in our ivory tower and dictate things that we think are happening or that certain partisan entities are telling us to do. And it's a tough job being a city commissioner, water board, school board educator. They're all public service and they all looking for how do they balance their budgets and things like that, as well as accounting. This revenue neutral thing, I did support it at the time. I do like the idea of transparency and taxation. However, I would fully support that, it needs to take into account the inflationary aspects. If we try and attain a revenue neutral, I spent $100 last year, I'm going to spend $100 this year, I'm going to spend $100 for the next 5 years. Our inflation rate is at 6.9% or so, or it has been in the last year, last 6 months. 6.9%. If I spend $100, let's just do simple math. I'm going to be able to buy $94 worth of goods this year versus $100 last year, and it's going to continue to decline. People do need raises. We do have inflation on our materials. Local government does have rising costs. All those things factor in, and if we hit revenue neutral, we're saying, hey, let's drive ourselves down into the dirt, or raise your taxes. And I just feel like this revenue neutral is not an honest goal. We need to have revenue neutral with some kind of inflationary piece built into it for the local governments if we're going to require these types of activities from them. So that's my position on that.
So in general, a lot's been said. I agree with the truth in taxation. I believe in revenue neutral. Obviously, when inflation is skyrocketing out of control, governments need to be able to take a look at what it takes to actually fund operations. But I think the key thing is it's not an unchecked, well, because property taxes went up or valuations went up, automatically what we assess and ultimately what we collect in the form of property tax must go up. So I do believe that there needs to be that dialogue back and forth, and we need to continue to put pressure to manage costs, just like any business would do. No businesses start with a budget that says, well, because inflation went up, my budget's going to go up 3% or 6%. No, they take a look and say, how do I get better at what I do and make my expenses match the rate of inflation? That's where any business starts, any business, period. And they also do that, and they offer salary increases to do that. The second thing I would offer is this, and it's maybe a different look at property taxes in this county. This county is one of 4 in the state. In fact, it's the worst in the state when it comes to the ratio of property taxes that are collected from personal property tax to commercial property. We are the worst in the state. The ratio, I think, is 86 to 14%. The state average is roughly 60-40. So when you think about that challenge for us, that is our reality. It's because we have a lot of federal property here, but it also, if that's our reality, then what are we doing collectively to work together, whether it's at the state level, with counties, with the municipalities, to make that a different reality? I don't profess to have the answer to that today, but until this county solves that problem, property taxes will continue to be very, very dicey, and for those of us paying them, will continue to be one of the most onerous issues that we have out there. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, this next question, I think you rephrased it to consolidate a couple questions. So, the state legislature has supported disabled vet programs. Where do you stand on non-disabled tax initiatives and veteran tax relief bill? Look at
Clearly, the disabled vet's going to get the most, publicity. We're going to support them. I think one of the issues is that we need to have a way to look at the overall programs that we are offering. Now, we've now got a new veterans home. It's going to be built in Mesquite. I'm very disappointed that they built it there instead of here in Leavenworth and along our K7 corridor. But we've got it. And that is a relief for those veterans, especially our Vietnam era. But we need to look at the programs that will benefit them and keep them going. Now, one simple thing that affected my daughter-in-law was being able to transfer over certifications. We've worked on those for veterans that are now getting out. Maybe they're a teacher or whatever their particular specialty is, without having to go through all the extensive paperwork that we sometimes overregulate with. And I think that is another solution to working for those veterans. Thank you.
So the legislature passed a number of things to help with property taxes for everybody, not just disabled veterans, and the governor vetoed it. So I'll just echo again, if you take nothing else away from what I say here today, elections have consequences. There was one person that was running that had a history of cutting taxes, who was promising that they would
that a centerpiece of their administration was going to be cutting taxes for retirees especially. And there was one person that said she was going to do it that did not have a history of doing it. And that's the person that won, and she vetoed all her tax relief. Some of the things she vetoed: $20,000 exemption of your property valuation from property taxes on top of the $40,000 that's already exempted. She vetoed that. Senate Bill 8 had property tax relief for disabled veterans, but it also had property tax relief for everybody 65 years or older. It expanded the house value to $500,000, so pretty much all the houses in Leavenworth would have qualified, and increased the maximum income to $80,000 and removed Social Security from that calculation. That would have hit almost every senior in Leavenworth, whether they were a disabled veteran or not. She vetoed it. So we're going to bring all that stuff back next year, and God willing, we're going to get it passed. But I agree with you. We own houses here in Leavenworth that we renovate and we rent out, and it's not just crushing the homeowners; it's crushing the renters, because we have to raise the rent because we have to pay the property taxes. We own businesses here in the downtown, or commercial buildings in the downtown, that have businesses in them, and we have to increase those rents so we can pay our property taxes, in addition to the mortgages with the interest rates going up because of inflation. So I'm with you. We got to get this done, but we need an honest broker in the State House and the second floor who's going to sign this legislation.
I'll try to be brief on this one, maybe give Senator Pittman some extra time if he wants it. And I'm not going to restate what Representative Johnson and Proctor talked about. I would say this, though, and certainly I would entertain any bill that would willing to listen in hearing and gracefully listen to what constituent testimony would be in hearing for any disabled group. That's our responsibility as legislators, and I would do that. I mentioned before there's a fiscal note that goes with it, so you look at the cost of the state, you look at the benefits, and then you make an informed decision to do that. And again, I would certainly do that with regard to others with disabilities or disadvantage. But I would say this, just on a personal note, supporting disabled veterans is more than showing up in a Veterans Day parade. It's a hell of a lot more than that. And I know that there are times when we talk about veterans, unless you know, and again, this tends to get a little emotional for me. But it is more than showing up on Veterans Day. There are people that have gave their lives, their bodies are broken, and there's an opportunity for us to say, so when someone says, I support veterans, show me. Don't show up in the parade and don't do anything else. Show me. So again, a little bit emotional for me, but again, back to the question, it's about those with disadvantages and disabilities, certainly. Take a look at that and make sure we try to do the right thing for all Kansans. Thank you.
I've heard this question, and I agree. I mean, in the last 7 years, I've worked on veterans issues as a keystone of what I've done, and I've come through on a lot of those promises. Whether it was starting the Veterans Home that services not just disabled veterans, but all veterans, and bringing that to Northeast Kansas. That was a huge win for our community, even though it is a little bit far from an hour away. But it's huge for Northeast Kansas. And I was proud to be a part of that. I was proud to put this bill through with Senator Peck, who's from Southwest Kansas, that gives veterans and the military brats out there in-state tuition, and they don't have to be disabled. This is all of them. It brings them to Kansas. These are people that will come and potentially work here in Kansas. And so while we do see an outflow maybe of some of the retirees, we need an inflow of workers here in Kansas, here in Northeast Kansas where we're growing. We've got apprenticeship programs that we've started up through the state commerce department. These address and target our veterans, not just disabled veterans, but those that are retiring and transitioning into the civilian world. These are all great programs. And then it was mentioned there's an effort out there to expand what Senator Holland was pushing for years, the Golden Year tax that passed last year, that I was happy to co-sponsor as well. And that puts a tax freeze for our disabled veterans and our over 65 population. That's different from an all-out exemption. It's a tax freeze, and it keeps the local governments whole by having state revenues make up the difference. and we were trying to expand that this year. And that was one of those that went down in that whole package of things. So I continue to work for the veterans. We'd love to see us do a little bit on the car tags and things like that, and start reducing some of the fees that we collect from our retirees in that regard, and some other aspects like that. But I do understand the question. We need to target more than just the disabled veterans. Okay.
Thank you, gentlemen. Our next question takes us in a slightly different direction. The author of this says, I am concerned about voting machines and drop boxes used in elections. Is there any effort to go to paper ballots and some same-day voting with the use of IDs, but account for absentee voting, for allowing for absentee voting? Let me read it one more time. Is there any effort to go to paper ballots, same-day voting, with the use of IDs, but prevents the use of absentee voting?
So I'm the chair of the elections committee, so I spend a lot of time on this issue, and I don't know how I talk about it in 2 minutes. So I'm going to hit some wave tops, and I apologize in advance if I go a little bit over. Kansas has the most, it's in the top 8 in the country for most secure voting systems. And that's according to the the America First Policy Institute, which is Donald Trump's think tank. And he's obviously very passionate about this issue. So we have a secure voting system, but it doesn't matter if people don't believe it. At the very core of our democracy, I mean, just in the bones of how our system works, people have to be confident that only people who are eligible to vote are voting, and that their vote is being counted, that the results of the election reflect the will of the voters. And so anything that we can do to improve that confidence is good for Kansas, and it's good for America. And as the elections chair, that's the measures we've been looking at. Drop boxes are a point of deep consternation for a lot of folks because there are no regulations and there are no standards. Some of them are very secure. I just spent the last month going around to every elections commissioner in the state of Kansas except for Shawnee, because I'd already been there, watching how they do elections and talking to them about how to make them more secure. And they're doing a great job on ballot boxes, but then you go out into other places and sometimes it's a slot in the side of the building where you can put ballots and your taxes and your license renewal. That is not secure. So we needed a standardized set of regulations in order that everybody's doing it the same. I was proud to get that bill authored and get that passed through my committee and passed overwhelming bipartisan support in the House. It didn't get over to the Senate this year. I'm hoping that this next year we'll be able to get that done.
I guess where I would land on this one is, ideally, in a perfect world, what I would like to get back to is election day. When you pay your mortgage is due on a certain day. When you pay your cable bill, when you pay your electric bill. I mean, ideally, that's the way to go. I realize, though, that in the current environment, that's not possible. And I don't think that in this particular issue that there's a magic pill or a bill that we could write and pass next year that would satisfy every voter in this room. There just isn't. It's a contentious issue. So I guess where I land on this is this. Keep in mind that there are a good number of people that still believe election day is election day. There are countries that do that. Knowing that we can't get there. So what do I think is important? I think voter ID is important. I think showing a voter ID, you have to show a voter ID or an ID to do virtually anything in this country. Why you wouldn't have to do that to vote is beyond me. And then I think it's a little bit about what Representative Crocker talked about. There have to be safeguards to make sure that there are others aren't trying to game the system when it comes to voting in this country. It is the most precious thing that we can do to secure the face of our democracy and the way our democracy works in the future. Again, so have guardrails that protect the integrity of the elections, get closer to Election day is election day. That obviously means you have to do early voting and the things that we do today. But let's not make it wide open and you can vote 4 months before the election. Oops.
That works, by the way.
So, voter elections. When I was with the sheriff's office in Wyandotte County, one of our requirements at election time was we provided the security. We had to have deputies out there. And there are some things that went on in Wyandotte County back in the day, maybe still now, that were very unique. One of those is called ballot harvesting, in which individuals can go pick up disabled, go to the nursing home, etc., and then bring in a whole bunch of ballots. And that included even helping fill them out, literally checking them. And that was an issue that we had to try to keep from happening, and I'm going back quite a few years. Fast forward, I asked Representative Pat, I said, why don't you just stick a needle in your eye rather than be chair of that committee? Because he took more abuse as a committee chair for that than probably most of the other committees. Because it's such an argumentative issue. He got heck. And I mean on a regular basis, both from the media and from people. Because we have such a diverse idea. Now, we need to streamline how we accept those ballots. I personally believe that election day is election day. And that when the election is done at the end of that day, it should be over. But clearly, before there, the absentee ballots on military ballots, it was very difficult getting our kids' votes in when they were over in Afghanistan and Iraq. Trying to do it correctly and get it timely, and then the mail didn't come through. But I think we're getting closer. And I think our State Secretary of State, Scott Schwab, has done a very good job.
So we have 8 most secure elections here, and yet it's a contentious issue. You heard it here. We, in the state, we had so many bills coming through that were attacking our election process and the way we do it. We have to balance security, but we also have to balance access to voting. In this country, we've had a history of marginalizing certain communities, certain income levels, based on where they live, who they are, how they work, the types of jobs they have. And what we have is an effort that's reminiscent of 50, 80 years ago in certain communities in this country where there were distinct efforts to minimize those types of votes. We had a Secretary of State, Chris Kobach, who went in and attacked this very issue for years. Did not find more than a handful of indiscretions. And those were people who voted twice in another state and in this state. In the Senate, we had a bill passed overwhelmingly, eliminated all ballot boxes across the state. Talk about taking access to voting down. And we have some of the most secure ballot boxes out here. We've got video cameras that watch. It's a distinct effort that we see happening across the country. I don't think it should be happening. I think that we need to be looking at how do we increase the access to voting. We don't decrease the ability for our people to mail in ballots like we were trying to do in the legislature this year. We don't reduce the number of days. We can't vote 4 months out. That's not even a reality. We have 2 or 3 weeks that we can vote in. So, I mean, if there's one issue that really drives me crazy, it's taking the voice of the people and trying to minimize those who can vote so we can consolidate power in this state. And that's what I really feel is going on in this state.
Next question. How did you vote on SB 209, removing the 3-day grace period from mail-in ballots? And then what data, not just your feelings, but what data did you use to make your decisions? And by data, the author meant surveys, number of letters, so.
So Senate Bill 209
brings us online with 31 other states in the United States that require that mail-in ballots are in by 7 p.m. on election night. That's how it was in the state of Kansas until 5 years ago. That was the law. It just changed, and I think we saw the results of kind of the extreme case when COVID hit and we had this huge flood of mail-in ballots that overwhelmed the system. And so I think that it's important that, as several of my fellow representatives up here said, that people have confidence that votes that are not valid are not being counted, whether that's from somebody who's not eligible to vote or votes that come in after the legal timeline, or votes that don't come in with a stamp from the post office saying that they were mailed on X or Y day. We can't make the post office stamp those ballots. So if a ballot, according to Kansas law right now, not 209, but right now, if a ballot comes in after Election Day and it doesn't have that stamp from the post office saying when it was mailed, it cannot be counted. It cannot legally be counted. That's the law. And so the big data number, to answer your question, that we didn't have, that nobody could tell us, is how many ballots weren't counted because they didn't have the date stamp from the post office saying when they were voted. So I would rather not have that uncertainty and just tell people, hey, we're going to go back to where we were 4 or 5 years ago when you had to have your ballot in by 7 p.m. on Election Day. Military voters, they get their ballots 45 days before the election. They can email them in, fax them in. They get all kinds of special considerations because they're serving us. They're not going to be disenfranchised by this. Let's bring us online with 31 other states in the country.
I'll keep this answer real short. My process when we were going through voting on a bill in a House was to keep notes, and my notes on this particular bill are at home. But for the reasons that Representative Crocker mentioned, as I recall the vote on this particular issue, that's the reason I voted for it. There were things done, I think, because of the COVID pandemic to make sure that we either were thinking about not disenfranchising voters, but there were unintended consequences with it. And the potential is certainly there. That's the reason I voted for it, if for no other reason. That's a pretty simple answer. Thank you.
So I voted against taking away that 3-day grace period. And my reasoning was we can't control the post office, that's true. If I were to go in and mail my letter, I vote in on Monday, I can't control that it's going to go to Oklahoma, up to Missouri, and then do a circuitous route and come back around maybe on Wednesday morning. I can't control that as a voter. Hopefully I would have been really on the ball and got it in on Saturday. We know we all want to keep ourselves accountable. We want our voters to be accountable as well. But the sheer fact is, it's only being counted if the postmark is there. You heard it right here. To say that because we don't know how many didn't have postmarks is a red herring. It's simply to say which ones did have, and when they looked at the data provided by a group called Leavenworth-Lansing that went and investigated, there were tens of thousands of voters who would have been disenfranchised in our state if we had not allowed the we would have disenfranchised if we would not allow them the votes to come in on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. It's a good process. There's not been any investigation that there's fraud going on, or there's not been any results from the investigation that fraud's going on. It allows more people to have access, and if they've gotten their vote in and that thing is timestamped, there's no reason not to count it, because the election is not finalized until the final count with the votes a couple weeks later in count. Thank you.
Yes, I support that it needs to be in by those time periods if it has to have the time stamp. I don't question that whatsoever. My income tax, when I send it in, I send it in registered now. Make sure that the IRS knows it was on time and that they got it. And I don't know why we wouldn't continue to protect those ballots by making sure that they come in time.
Okay, next, the few minutes we have left, let's switch gears and we'll have a few social issues rather than just pure legislation. So the next question. Voters decided with the value them both amendment to keep abortion laws the same. How have you honored that choice during the session?
I think the voters, when they soundly defeated value them both, they defeated the constitutional amendment that was voted on in August of last year. I respect that vote. Period. That was the 2019 Hosen-Downer decision that came out. However, I still respect life. So there's a couple of bills. The Babies Born Alive bill is one that I'll talk about. That's a pro-life bill. Representative Ron Clifford, who's from Coffeyville, talked about one of the first instances he had as an attending physician in an emergency room at the early point of his career. He's called into a code blue in an emergency room, and he walks in and he describes the room as complete calm. Can't figure out, he's called into the wrong room. And he's thinking, I'm in the wrong place, until somebody points to a bassinet against the wall. And there is a baby moving and crying that survived an abortion. That's a human being. That's a human being. When Democrats talk about abortion, they talk about when the body expels the tissue. That's the difference. So I respect the value them both decision, but I respect life. And I will vote for that baby, who, by the way, has to have a death certificate because that baby survived the abortion. That baby was a human being. I will vote for bills like that all day long. Thank you.
So in addition to the Born Alive bill that Representative Beeler talked about, the other bill that we passed that touches on this topic is abortion pill reversal notification, a woman's right to know. The bill requires doctors that are administering a chemical abortion to notify women that if after they take the first pill in the series, before they take the next pill, if they change their mind, there are medical procedures that can save the baby. It's the administration of progesterone, which is the natural hormone that women produce to hang on to the baby when they're pregnant. And there are humans walking around today on planet Earth who were saved from an abortion by a mother who changed her mind, took progesterone, and saved the baby. If you don't take the second pill in a chemical abortion, 26% of the time, the baby will survive and be born normally. If you take progesterone, it's 60%. I think women have a right to know that. That's not about banning abortion. That's not about regulating abortion out of existence. The people have spoken with the value of both amendment. We no longer have the right to regulate abortion. But I think that women have a right to know that they have options besides abortion. And I think that if somebody changes their mind, if you're pro-choice, you should be in favor of them being able to make the choice to save their baby.
But when Democrats talk, we have a lot of different opinions. Quite simply. There is no when Democrats talk. I don't say that about Republicans. I don't say that about Democrats. Now, value them both said that, it was a sound resolution from the people. So we must respect that. Of course, there's this Born Alive bill, and I supported that one, because I do believe in Kansas we do have limits in terms of what we're willing to accept. And so, for the very arguments Representative Beeler gave, I felt like that was a very valid, that you've got to have a backstop. And I think in Kansas we do have that notion. But we also have the notion that women deserve that autonomy, and they're going to make those very difficult decisions with their doctor, and we don't need the state coming in and dictating those things to them. There were a huge ton of bills that came at us this year, despite the value of both resolution passing, that were anti-abortion. It's the fact they were introduced. Some of them made it to the floor, some of them got passed. Regarding the progesterone, that's an off-label usage of that. When they did the study out there, they had to stop the study because women were hemorrhaging. They don't have valid proof yet that this is an effective way. And the only reason why we might not want to support it, which I did not support, is that we don't want to force doctors to say, hey, you can do this, you should always try ivermectin to counter this thing. You should always try progesterone, and that's a valid thing that's been tested when it hasn't been tested and medically verified. So we got to be careful about what we say. Yes, they know. Women can go and find that information out. But we don't need to force doctors and practitioners to say, hey, this is a certified technique when it's not necessarily. So we got to be careful.
So I ran on a platform that I would vote to put the value of both amendment up for vote. I meant this. And I personally believe that it should be stopped. But when people voted no, I made the statement to others is you had a chance to vote on it, and I will honor that. But I will not honor live births or letting children die because we don't care. So I supported when a child is born alive, even after an abortion, we should try to treat them. That's why we have emergency medical. We go out and we deal with things. And we looked at several different things that we could do. One of the bills that I brought in, started a year ago, was called a child safety device. We know that in 18 other states, if you put out a place where a mother who was distraught, wanted to give up her child, could bring it and leave it there in this safe haven box. Why wouldn't you want to save a child's life so he could go up for adoption? I was amazed at how attacked I was on the floor of the House and battled numerous attempts to kill this very simple bill. It came to us out of McPherson, Kansas, where a baby was put in a dumpster. Now, we were fortunate on that one. We were able to save that child. They found it at the time. But we know that young mothers, that 14, 15, 16-year-old, are so distraught at times, they're not making valid decisions. Let's give them a good way to save that child. And so we put this out there. It passed. But only because we put another bill in it. Otherwise, I'm quite certain the governor would be done. Children deserve it.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming and participating today. We only have 5 minutes left, and we promised our legislators opportunity to wrap up. So, gentlemen, closing statements.
Ted, how long is this closing statement? 2 minutes? Okay.
Hey, it's been a pleasure having you here. I appreciate your engagement here. It's so important to have this dialogue going on. We have different opinions, but we can work together as a community, and I think that's what's important. That's what I bring to the table. I can work with the governor's staff, I can work with my Democrats, and the bills that I had passed is because I have those connections with the Republican Party, both in the House and the Senate now. And that's a huge value to our community. I can't overemphasize how important that is, especially when it comes to advocating both for small things like some of the bills that I push forward and some of the bigger things, as well as bringing money here for, like when I adjusted the housing incentive program, one of the biggest things we've done in 3 decades to make sure this year that Leavenworth County was included in that. It wasn't just the rural counties. So I hope to continue this. Next year is going to be a big year. I do anticipate as long as our budgets can support it and we can project out that we can fully fund education and our roads and our retirement systems, and that we can continue to bring in those big businesses like Apex, where I was on the committee to help bring that in. That's what's important to me, is to continue to drive workforce development, housing alternatives, make sure our democracy is protected, and making sure that we protect the freedoms, all of our freedoms, no matter our zip code or our gender or our position in life. So thank you for coming. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. Again, if you want to look at the map, see if you're in my district, grab one of those folders. We have a good delegation. Leavenworth County works together. I miss Dave French, but his replacement's doing okay. But we have achieved a lot of things. Please reach out to us. I also want you to be aware that we now have an advanced internship program. If you have grandchildren or children who are in college or going to be a senior who would like to do internships, please reach out to us. Pat Proctor and I both sponsored them. Former students of mine, we love that. And the same thing goes for pages. If one of you has some student in that middle school up to early high school, get them up, guys, call us. We need them up in the State House learning about government. There's no better way. I look forward to you reaching out to me, and I will be glad to stick around and answer any questions that you have. And again, thank you so much.
Thanks to the Chamber for hosting this event, and all of you took the time to be here today. I think we all have a strong obligation to stay involved in our local and state governments. I think it's also important, and I read through some of my notes, that we commit to being civil and respectful when we speak about politics and government. I go back to being out walking houses and districts and stuff last year. Voters may not agree with each other on political viewpoints. We're still citizens of this community in the state and the county, and we'll never reach our full potential unless we continue to demonize each other. We need to talk and listen to each other. There's a very polarized environment out there, but I've never had a productive conversation with someone screaming at me. It's probably not going to happen, so I think we need to kind of remember that. And I'm honored to serve as the representative from the 40th District, and I'm excited to pick up where we left off in January. And as some have already talked about, I am confident we will pass a sustainable tax plan next year. This state has exceeded its consensus revenue estimates for over 2 years. We're on track for $2.8 billion of surplus by year-end 2024. That's taxpayer money. It needs to come back to the taxpayers. While the House isn't in session, I'm still working as your representative. I mentioned the website earlier. It's kslegislature.org. You can go out there, find my email address and my phone number, call me and email me, and I'll try to respond. And I would say also, like Tim, I've already filed for re-election, did that about 2 weeks ago. I don't intend to be a career politician. I don't intend to be here 10 years from now. But what I do intend to do is commit to you to be hardworking and fully committed to this district for the rest of this term and the next one. And I want you to know I'm all in on that. So again, thanks to the Chamber for this opportunity today. And I guess Pat, thank you.
It's an honor to serve you as your state representative. But service is a sacrifice, and so I'd like to take a minute to thank my fellow legislators. Dave's been in the legislature a year. Me and Tim have been in the legislature 3 years. Jeff's been in the legislature 7 years. I'd like to thank all of you for your service. It is a sacrifice. I'd also like to thank the legislative spouses. Some of them are here, Lisa, Holly, my beautiful wife, Marie. It's a sacrifice for them, too, because while we're in Topeka, they're getting the earful. You know, our business has been attacked, spray painted. My wife's business practices running the business day-to-day have been attacked, and I'm sure all the other legislative wives have had to sacrifice for our service. So I'd like to thank all of you, too, for your sacrifice. Session's over, but for legislators 365 days a year. I am always helping constituents with unemployment. All of us are unemployment, or VA benefits, or tax issues, or problems getting their driver's license renewed. And so, if you have any of those issues, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. My phone number, I'm going to put this video up. My phone number is 913-250-5553. That goes straight to me, and I'll help you with whatever the issues. You can also find my email at the kslegislature.org. It's pat.proctor@house.ks.gov. If you have an issue with state government, federal government, county government, city government, please reach out to me. I will help you work through your issue, because that's what I swore to do when I swore to serve you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time out Saturday morning and having me talk with us. please express your appreciation one more time.